Well, hello there. Welcome to this week's food security series. This time we're talking about foraging wild food safely. And what we're going to emphasize is some things that you just need to have in place when you're foraging wild foods. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the wild foods that are available in the spring or right now. Of course, depending on where you live, people join us from all over the world. Depending on where you are in your season, you may or may not have the same plants that I'm going to talk about. But make notes because eventually your area will have these as well, either later than mine or before mine. If you have a season that doesn't face winter, you have a year-round ability to forage. And if you have a seasonal climate, then you may have these in the spring, and then again they may come back later in the fall. That's what I find with mine, that what I have in the spring will return in the fall as the new seeds drop. And so make notes, and if they're not available for you right now, they will eventually come available. So today we're going to talk about foraging wild food safely. And the first thing I want to talk about is the toolkit that you need to have on hand when you go foraging. It's not enough to go for a walk, see something, pick it and shove it in your pocket when we're talking about food security. Why are we talking about food security now? Because everything in the news seems to indicate that we're going to face some food shortages as we're coming up to the fall. There are some crop failures already because of cold weather when there should have been warm weather after the seeding. It looks like the grain crops coming in are not going to be as high as what they were expecting and predicting. Also, that affects livestock operations, and with COVID, it also affects some of the supply chain being broken down. We've already seen it in the grocery store with shortages, and so we're doing a series on what you can do to ensure food security in your family if we face shortages coming in the fall. They might be manipulated shortages, they might be true shortages, or it might just be that food is available, but it's being thrown away instead of being transported to the store. So the last few weeks, we've been talking about things you can do for your family just to make sure that you don't face these shortages or that they aren't life-threatening for your family. So today we're talking about foraging wild food safely, what you need to have on hand to do it safely, and also we're going to talk briefly about what's available in wild foods that you might not know about. People have actually survived on just eating wild foods, not going to the grocery store. I mean, it is how our ancestors survived. And the only thing that we don't have is the knowledge to be able to do it safely. And so that's what I'm hoping to kind of tweak in your mind right now, that it is possible. And some things to keep in mind. This is not going to be a complete course on how to forage safely and what to forage. And there is a lot to consider. But I'm hoping that with this, I'm going to just plant a seed, tweak your appetite for what's possible. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a couple of resources to help you dig a little deeper in this, if this is something that interests you. So we're going to talk about the toolkit that you should have when you go foraging. We're going to talk about a little bit about botany. We're going to talk about some safety rules that you should keep in mind and just memorize these. And then we're going to talk about what exactly you could forage right now. Some of these plants are going to be available to most of us in North America. If you live in the desert, you might have different plants available. Or if you live in like Texas or Florida, where you have a tropical climate, you might already be past the season for these, but we'll talk about them. And then I'm going to, at the end, give you a couple of resources that are available right now. Two free resources that you can take advantage of just to start your knowledge path on this area. So what is foraging? Foraging is where you go harvest something that you did not plant, basically. You might be harvesting noxious weeds. You might be harvesting wild food. You might be harvesting in a gleaning sense. But foraging is basically you're harvesting something for food or for medicine that you did not plant. What do you need when you go? Well, a lot of people just go out and they don't plan to forage. They might be on a hike and they just go and pick. And that's fine if you're talking about berries. If you're talking about something else though, like leaves or roots or flowers, your hands might not be enough. And so when I go foraging, there are a couple of tools I have. One is a pair of pruning shears. This is the Felco pruning shears. They're a good quality pair of pruning shears. You want to have them sharp and clean. And this is for harvesting things that are more woody in nature, branches, because if you just grab something and tear it, you're going to damage the plant. And when we forage, we actually want to leave the area better than when we came. You don't want to harvest everything in an area. You only want to harvest no more than a quarter, 25% of what's there. You want to leave it better than you came. So when you finish foraging, it shouldn't look like you were even there. Okay, so pruning shears. And then when I'm harvesting something a little deeper, like roots, I use this tool, which is a hori hori. This one is made by Bare Bones. It's fairly heavy. I just carry it in my backpack. I don't always take this out. But I do take it out if I'm going to harvest roots. So dandelion roots, burdock roots. If it's in the fall, I might use it to harvest Oregon grape roots to get the berberine, golden seal, those kinds of things. So I don't take it with me all the time, but if I'm going to harvest roots, or if I'm going to be harvesting stinging nettle, I will use a sharp tool like this to cut it rather than just pulling with my hands. So you can also use scissors. Scissors, though, are not as strong as having a sharp knife. You could use a pocket knife as well, or something like a Leatherman tool. If you had like a multi-tool, that could work too. You basically need a sharp blade to cut, so you're making clean cuts. And also you're not damaging the plant. You also want in your toolkit a field guide. Now these are the ones I use. I'm in British Columbia, and these are two regional field guides that I use to identify plants. Now, if you're an experienced forager, once you've ID'd a plant and you know it for sure, you don't need to keep referring back to this field guide. But field guides are helpful if the plant is new to you. Even experienced foragers make mistakes when they're identifying new to them plants. And so it's really important to have a field guide reference, but you want more than a field guide reference. You want to have at least a confirmation in 3 different places. A field guide, an experienced forager with you to check. A picture on an app is not enough. So if you're completely relying on a digital app to tell you what a plant is, do not do that. It's fine to be one source, but then you want to confirm it in a field guide, a paper field guide, and then you also want another source. If you're using field guides and you're saying, well, I'm going to go to 2 field guides, so that's 2 sources, make sure that they're different authors, different publishers. Just to get the full broad effect if it's new to you. The best thing is to have an experienced forager go out with you and help you identify. So if you can go on a nature walk or a field walk with a botanist, that's good too. But I have done that, and not all botanists even know all the plants. So that's where you want more than one source. In fact, I've been on walks with experienced foragers who got the plant ID wrong. So you want to make sure that you have more than one source. So we talked about a toolkit, what's in your toolkit, field guides, tools like pruning shears or a sharp knife or a hori hori, depending on what you're going out to forage. Of course, a basket or something to carry it home in. And that depends on what you're harvesting. If you're going out for, say, berries, you're going to want a basket or a container to hold the berries so they don't get crushed. If you're going out for leaves, you might want a basket or a backpack to carry leaves or flowers. For roots, you're going to want maybe even a bucket to hold everything. But if you're doing mushrooms, then you want to use a basket where they're not going to get compressed. And the advantage of a basket, if there's any seeds involved or mushroom spores, a basket will let those spores go. So you'll actually be reseeding the area. So baskets are really great too. And then the most important tool to have in your toolkit is knowledge. You absolutely want to expand your knowledge of foraging, grow in your knowledge, add new information about botany and IDing plants, and continually grow in that area. If foraging is something that you want to do, you absolutely want to grow in your knowledge. What I'm teaching you, what you learn in an online class, what you learn in the walk, it all builds on each other. Knowledge is something that can't be taken away from you, so it's worth the investment. Especially when you're talking about your own family's food security and security for growing or foraging for your own medicine. There are some safety rules that you want to keep in mind too. When they are spraying with herbicides on roadways, they generally spray 50 feet from a major highway, on either side of a major highway and in the middle. So if you are foraging near a major highway, you want to be at least 50 feet from the edge of the road before you forage, because otherwise that might have been sprayed. And they actually spray from the side of the road. They don't get down off their vehicle. They're actually spraying wide with a vehicle. So you want to stay away from major highways and be no closer than 50 feet when you're foraging. Also, the chemicals they use on the road can spray onto plants. And so 50 feet is the general rule. Generally here in BC, when they do spray, they put up a sign saying it's sprayed, so you know it's been sprayed. But I don't know if they do that everywhere. So always keep in mind that if you're close to a highway and you're foraging, you might be harvesting something that's been sprayed with a poison. On a side road, like a logging road or a minor road, the general rule is 25 feet, but pay attention to signage because they might be spraying, and you definitely don't want to be harvesting food that's been sprayed with an herbicide because that's a poison. The other thing when you're foraging, you want to make sure that you do have permission to harvest. You don't want to cross into somebody's field and start harvesting. You could get yourself shot. You could get charged with trespassing. So always make sure you have permission. And a lot of times people will let you forage on their land when you ask permission. And if so, the general consensus is to offer part of what you've harvested to the person who owns the land. So if you're going on and harvesting from old apple trees, you want to get permission from the landowner and then offer them part of the harvest as payment for using their land. If you're on wild land, Crown land in British Columbia or federal land, you want to make sure that the law says you have permission. So sometimes you have to get a permit to forage. Sometimes you just need to know the law in your area, whether it's okay to forage. Only forage where it's legal to do so. And then when you are foraging, make a point of planting as you go. So if you're foraging berries, drop some ripe berries and crush them into the ground with your foot to encourage more plants. If you're harvesting flowers, drop some seeds as you go to encourage those wild populations to continue to grow. If you're harvesting mushrooms, make sure that the spores from the mushrooms you gather can spread by allowing them to drop as you walk. So we talked about your toolkit. We've talked about the importance of field guides and for having the right tools. One thing I didn't mention, you should take some bug repellent with you. And you want to be careful also of when you're foraging of wild animals like bears or cougars, to make sure that you are aware of your surroundings to do it safely. Where I live, there are black bears right now and black bears with babies. And so if you're out berry foraging, for instance, you might just encounter a bear foraging as well on the other side of the bush. So you want to be aware, you want to be safe, and as they say here in British Columbia, be bear aware. And we talked about some safety rules. And now let's talk about botany, because that's probably the most important thing. Plants have been kind of categorized into plant families based on identifiable patterns and characteristics. There are two plant families that are very safe to forage. And once you learn the characteristics of those plant families, then you can always find them in the wild and use them for foraging for food or medicine. There are other plant families that are a little bit more dangerous. They might have glycosides in them that are dangerous for humans. They might require special processing to get rid of the toxins before you can eat them. So it's really important to identify the plant family and to understand the safety and the dangers of each plant family. So when we're teaching our children, I homeschooled and I taught my kids what was safe and what wasn't safe. We always wanted them to know what was safe so that they could see it for themselves. So one family that's very safe is the mint family. And just about every mint family plant that has a fragrance is safe to eat. It's safe to use for medicine. It's safe to use for food. The identifying features of the mint family are that it has square stems with opposite leaves, and the opposite leaves turn at a right angle. So if you were to look from the top down on a plant, in fact, let me show you a mint family plant. So this is basil. This is a mint family plant. Now, when you look at basil from the top down, you can see that it makes a cross. And the stem is square and the leaves will be opposite each other, and then they'll turn at a right angle. And every mint family plant has this characteristic. Also, if a plant has a fragrance and it's a mint family plant, it is safe to use for food and it is safe to use for medicine. 100%, there are no exceptions. So as you're learning to forage, train your eyes to recognize this mint family characteristic. Square stems, opposite leaves, and the mint family flower is a very interesting flower as well. So learn to know the mint family. The other very safe family that has no poisonous lookalikes is the Brassica family. Now, the key with the Brassica family is that it has a very distinctive flower. So you'll want to get it when it's flowering to know that it's a Brassica family. And within the Brassica family, you have a lot of wild plants like creasy greens, garlic mustard. Those are all very safe to forage. And often they're noxious as well, so nobody minds you taking them out of the field. The Brassica family also has very distinctive flowers. They start out looking like broccoli flowers, like broccoli, and so you can identify them that way. Use your field guide. Most field guides will be categorized as plant families. So for instance, this one I can turn and I can find the Brassica family and I can find the mint family. And that can help me determine whether this plant that I'm seeing in the field is safe or not. Now, there are many other families, and particularly the Apiaceae family, which is the carrot family, has some very poisonous plants. And so if you are foraging and you see something that looks like an Apiaceae, which will have the umbel flowers, it might be safe, but it might also be a very poisonous plant. So you really want to know your plant families first and then zero down on what the plants are. So to do that, you need to understand a little bit of botany. And the easiest way to learn botany is to learn these plant family patterns. Now, that's beyond the scope of this short talk, but I really want to encourage you, if you are going to go foraging, that you not just memorize each individual plant, but you learn to recognize the plant families and their characteristics and patterns so that you can safely identify even plants you've never seen before. And know, is this a mint family plant? Then it's safe. Or is this an Apiaceae carrot family plant? Then, oh, I need to be very exact. Now, interestingly enough, it is the Apiaceae family that trips up experienced foragers. And that's where you've got to be very careful. I know personally of foragers that have gone out and said, oh, this is, this is a wild carrot. And then it turned out not to be. Now, they didn't die, but there are toxic lookalikes like poison hemlock that are so toxic that even blowing a whistle from the stem can poison a child. And so you really want to make absolutely certain with the Apiaceae family that you have the right plant when you're wild foraging. So that's my warning. But mint family plants, square stems, opposite leaves are always safe if they have a smell. So this is basil. The smell is obvious. Other plants in this family, bee balm is in this family, or also called wild bergamot. That's in this family. Of course, mint is in this family. What else off the top of my head? Lavender, rosemary, those are wild plants, but they're in this family. There are a lot of food plants in the mint family. And always they have a square stem and opposite leaves. In the brassica family, of course, the plants that we plant in our garden, like kale and broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage, are all brassica, as well as radishes, as well as winter radishes, kohlrabi. Those are all brassica family plants. So if you're a gardener and you're planting them, you already have a sense of what they look like. And so when you see them in the wild, you'll go, oh, I recognize this. This is a wild mustard. Mustard is also brassica family. And so because it's a brassica, I know it's safe to eat or safe to use for medicine. And the whole plant is safe to use. So you can use the seeds and you can use the flowers and you can use the leaves. So let's go down. So far we talked about the toolkit you need. And if you're just joining us, we talked about having a field guide, having a first aid kit with you, bug spray, clippers, like pruning shears, a sharp knife for helping you with the harvest so you don't damage the plant. We talked about having either a backpack or a basket or bags or something to carry it home with. I often used my husband's hat because I forgot to bring something with me. So it's always a good idea to carry a basket on your arm if you plan to go foraging. And then very important, having the knowledge so that you can make a positive identification using at least 3 sources, and so you can be safe. And then we talked about some safety rules, which was not going closer than 50 feet from a major highway. In foraging, always stay 50 feet. And that's because they spray major highways with poisons. And also staying 25 feet away from the side of the roads, like logging roads or side roads. And that's because of the splash that can happen where they spray a road with chemicals in the winter, for instance, and then that backsplashes over the edges of the road when it rains. And then understanding the laws, who owns the land, do you have permission to harvest? Are you allowed to harvest in this area? And that way you can forage safely. And then we talked about just about 2 plant families that were super easy, the mint family and the brassica family. And I could go into more detail on that, but those 2 plant families are generally safe. Mint family, if it's square stems, opposite leaves, and it has a minty smell, it's safe to eat. And then the brassica family, the entire brassica family is safe to forage. The one family that isn't safe is the Apiaceae family, or the carrot family. They're the family with umbel flowers, flowers that look kind of like a lot of mini flowers in the shape of an umbrella, umbel. That's how we remember. That plant family, you need to be very, very specific because there are very poisonous members of that family. Giant hawkweed is in that family, for instance, and poison hemlock. But it also is the family we get parsnips and carrots and parsley and celery from. So there are also some edibles. You just want to be very, very sure in that plant family that you've made a correct identification. And then the pea family, again, has some lookalikes that are, or not lookalikes. The pea family has some plants that are toxic and some that aren't. For instance, hairy vetch is in that plant family, and it's basically not something you'd want to eat. It can give you gastric upset. The beans family, they need to be cooked in order to be safe, or you will get gastric upset. And there are some toxins that need to be specially treated by cooking to make it safe to eat. And there are other members of the family, like peas, that you can eat the whole plant, for instance, and it's perfectly safe. So again, you want to make a positive identification with the pea family. Now let's talk about specifics about what you can forage right now. So I'm in British Columbia. We've just passed our last frost date. And so we're moving into spring, but I'm going to talk about what I could have harvested in the last month. And I want to share a resource with you called that will help you with foraging in the spring. And Sarah, if you could please share that link with the group. This is free. It's a book that Sarah and I wrote together, and you can download it for free, and it'll give you some tips, not just about foraging a few of the spring tonic plants, but also how to use them. And you can go ahead over to my site and grab that. And then if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the comments, and I'm happy to answer your questions. Mickey said she loved the plant family talk and that she likes learning like that. That's great, Mickey. Thanks. So what to forage? Pretty soon we're going to be foraging roses. They haven't bloomed yet for me, but I know they will in the next 2 weeks. What we do with roses at this point, I would be harvesting the petals and letting them dry. And I use them in salad, fresh in salads. They're high in anthocyanins, which is an antioxidant that's really good for you. They're also a little bit flavorful if you get the fragrant roses. The darker they are, the better. You can also make jams out of them. You can make infused honeys or infused vinegars to use as salad dressing. And when you infuse them, you're actually pulling out all those antioxidants. There's also some vitamin C, flavonoids, a little bit of starch. So they're good food. Obviously, you wouldn't live on rose petals, but it's good for flavor, and they're kind of fun to use in salads. The other thing that you can get from roses, though, are you can use the leaves, and the leaves are very astringent, and you can pretty much use them in the same ways that you would use like a raspberry leaves. You could use them. They are used, in fact, for stopping diarrhea, especially in children. Where, a child has eaten too many cherries and they have diarrhea, you could give them a tea made with with rose leaves or rose petals, and it will stop the diarrhea. And other places where you need that astringency, it's helpful too, like during menstrual cramps, it can be helpful, or any other place where you just need to tighten things up and dry things down. And then later in the fall, we'll use roses again, and we'll harvest the hips for vitamin C. And the hips can be dried and just used in tea, or they can be made into a syrup. In fact, during World War II, when Britain was cut off from the mainland and cut off from getting like citrus fruit, they actually sent the children, like Girl Guides and Boy Scouts, out into the countryside to gather rose hips, and they were brought in, and each community made rose hip syrup, and then it was given to the children during the winter to prevent scurvy. So rose hips are very high in vitamin C, and also in carotenoids and flavonoids. So they're a really good wild food that's easy to find, easy to identify, and very safe. What you do want to do with the roses, if you're going to use them in tea, you can leave them whole. If you're going to use them like in a jam or a jelly or a syrup, you're going to want to remove the seeds first, because the seeds can be hairy and it can be irritating to the throat if you end up with a lot of the hair in it. You could also put it in a jelly bag, and if the jelly bag is very fine, it will catch those hairs. So if you don't want to go to all the work of removing all the seeds, you can do them with a jelly bag. Another plant right now, in my area, the hawthorn trees are blooming, and hawthorn is a heart herb, and the hawthorn leaves and flowers, when they're fresh and in bloom, are very good as a heart tonic. So that's a good thing to harvest. I would dry them and use them for tea. That's really the best way to use hawthorn flowers and leaves. They've done some studies, and they found that more of the antioxidants and heart healthy constituents were removed by just making them into a tea than a tincture or other ways of preparing them. In the fall, the hawthorn berries will also be able to be harvested and foraged. And so if you're out right now and you're seeing the flowers, make a note, a mental note or a paper note of where you're seeing the tree, so that you remember to go back in August and September to harvest the hawthorn berries. And remember, when you're harvesting berries, you may be sharing them with bears. So just be aware, depending on where you live, if there are bears in the area, to be bear aware as well. Also right now, the dandelions are available. Early spring, we harvest the greens before the flowers come. When the flowers are immature, you can also use those for food. Once they've opened, the leaves tend to become a little bit bitter. You can remove the bitterness by harvesting the leaves and boiling them and discarding the water, and then boiling them a second time and eating them that way. I don't like them that way, honestly. I have tried them that way. I don't like how they get mushy, so I don't use them that way. What I do is I dry the leaves, and then I use those, I powder them, and then I add them to other foods, like soups, or just sparingly. They're very high in vitamins and minerals. And so that's the advantage of dandelion. You can also harvest the flowers. If you harvest the flowers, you can use them for making dandelion syrup. You can dry the flowers and use them in salves for relieving pain, especially muscle pain from overextending yourself or working too hard and you get the muscle aches. Maybe after a hike, they're really good for that. You can also use them in tea and also make wine or mead. I like to make dandelion mead and then use it in the winter for colds and flu. Later in the fall, that's a good time to be harvesting the dandelion root. Basically, whether you harvest the root or the flower or the leaf, ask yourself, where is the plant putting its energy right now? Wherever the plant is putting its energy, that's the part that's going to be the most potent for you right now. So if your dandelions are flowering, the root of those dandelions doesn't have the maximum energy of the plant, the flowers do. And so if the plant is already flowering, wait a little while to do the root till the plant has gone to seed and the seeds have blown away. Then the plant starts putting more energy into the roots, and that's when you want to harvest the roots. If the plants haven't flowered yet and they're sending out a lot of green leaves, the energy obviously is going into the green leaves. So that's when you want to harvest the leaves. And that's a universal truth. If your tree has not yet leafed out and it's early spring, then, and you're seeing the sap starting to rise, then the energy is in the bark, and that's a good time to harvest the bark early spring before it leaves out. Once the leaves are out, the tree is putting its energy into the leaves, and that's the time to harvest leaves. Once a plant flowers and you see the flowers, that's the time to harvest flowers when they're beautiful and bright and fresh, because that's where the plant energy is. So wherever the plant energy is, that's the part of the plant you want to harvest. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we want to take no more than 25%. And when we harvest in the wild, we want to make sure that it doesn't even look like we were there. So if you're harvesting from a branch, harvest just 1 or 2 flowers from a branch and then move to another branch rather than stripping a branch. The exception to that is if you're pruning. If you're pruning a tree to help it grow better, then of course you can harvest the whole branch. Never waste it. So we talked about rose, dandelion, hawthorn, chickweed, sorrel, lamb's quarters. These are weeds that you might find in the garden. You might also find them in the wild, and they're edible and they're perfectly good to eat. One thing I should mention, if you're harvesting a lot of things like sorrel and that plant family, which is the beet family, you're going to end up with a lot of oxalic acid. And oxalic acid is fine in small amounts, but if you make it a major part of your diet, you can end up inhibiting your absorption of calcium. So that's just something to keep in mind. And some people shouldn't have very much oxalic acid if you're troubled with kidney stones and those kinds of things. And there's some cautions about oxalic acid that your doctor has probably already talked to you about. So any plants from the beet family, spinach family, amaranth family, those plants tend to be higher in oxalic acid. So if you're foraging for it, you want to be careful that you're not taking too much. And then there are many other plants, and if you can download that Spring Tonic book, and that will give you a broader range than what I can cover here. The one other thing I wanted to mention is that the Herbal Academy right now has a foraging webinar coming up. I think in the middle of June. It's called Wild Foraged Herbalism, and it's a free webinar. And Sarah, if you could share the link, go ahead and sign up for that free webinar. That's going to give you a little bit more information about the plant families. And I think they're offering their well crafting and botany course again pretty soon. And that's a great course. If you're a member of my DIY, the DIY Herbal Fellowship, you already have a botany course and a wild foraging course inside the fellowship. And if you haven't taken that yet, that's a great course to, it's a 2-part course, and that's a great way to get started on foraging safely. Again, that's inside the DIY Herbal Fellowship membership. So you need to be a member to access that course. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer it. Mickey says, even the exhaust fumes from along the highways are unhealthy and are absorbed by the plants there. Yes, they are. And there's a lot of plants too, Mickey, that actually are used to detoxify the soil. And so some of those plants, if they're in an area where there's toxins, you don't want to harvest them because those toxins will be in the plant leaves, because the plants are planted there specifically. What comes to mind is Japanese knotweed. Japanese knotweed is used specifically to detoxify petroleum and plastics. And so if you're harvesting Japanese knotweed in that area, you don't want to do that because of the fact that there will be toxins in the plants and leaves. Nikki says, what can I use cleavers for? Cleavers is a lymphatic. Basically, we use it to move lymph, and lymph is the major part of your immune system. So it's basically a detoxifier, moves lymph, helps your body clear toxins. So what we use it for, I use it in any kind of remedy that I'm using to detoxify. I'll also use it for any kind of if I'm trying to support the liver because the person has like a rash, which is evidence that their liver is clogged and not working properly, I will add Cleavers to the mix, along with burdock and dandelion root to just support the liver in clearing things up. If you were needing to move lymph for another reason, like maybe there's cancer or maybe there's cancer in the family, you would want to use Cleavers for that. And I use it as a tea during the winter. But in early spring, where you have an abundance of Cleavers, you can actually put it through a juicer and take the Cleavers juice, or you can put it through your blender, like a high-powered blender, like a Vitamix with some water, and then just strain off that concoction and strain it, and then use that. And you can freeze it in ice cubes even and keep it for longer. It's very good to detoxify, and basically Cleavers is for moving lymph. Simplified. I wouldn't use it like in a salad or something. It's very fibrous, and it wouldn't be pleasant to eat, but it's great for putting into like smoothies and juicing. Any other questions? And again, I have a free download for you, Spring Tonic herbs. And it basically, I think there's 9 herbs in there, and it lists the herbs, how to identify them, when the best time to harvest them is, and then how to use them. And then also the course with Herbal Academy, or the webinar. It's a free webinar, Wild Foraged Herbalism. And Sarah has shared those links, so go ahead and take advantage of those free things. I can't emphasize enough, if you want to do foraging, do it safely. Make sure that you do have a field guide, and not just any field guide, but one that's specific to your region. This is my region. If you're in BC, there's also plants of coastal British Columbia and plants of northern British Columbia. So they're very regional. They're not just like to your province or state, but they get right down into the region that you're in. And you should have one that has photographs, like this one has photographs to help you identify. And then also, if you have the opportunity in your area to go on a plant walk with an herbalist, then or someone who's an experienced forager, I highly recommend that. There's so much to say for going for a walk and actually touching the plant, seeing the area that they're growing in, and having a naturalist or an herbalist talk to you about how the plant is used is invaluable. And also, if you're doing mushrooms, if you want to forage mushrooms, I didn't touch on that very much. We're going to do more about mushrooms in a couple weeks. Sarah's actually going to come and talk to us about foraging mushrooms. For mushrooms, I highly recommend going with someone who's experienced, because there's just so many lookalikes, and the best thing you could do is find someone who's experienced mushroom foraging in your area to help you understand what you're looking at, what you're seeing, and the nuances between lookalikes. I mean, some mushrooms, the way that you tell the difference between 2 lookalikes is by scratching it and seeing what color the mushroom bruises. So those kinds of things an experienced mushroom forager can teach you, where you're not going to really learn it from a book. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. Thanks for being here, Mickey. And again, there are 2 free resources we have today. The ebook about foraging for spring tonics, and the wild foraged herbalism free webinar that's coming up in the middle of June. And I believe that's going to be recorded. So if you sign up for it and you can't make the live session, I believe it's going to be recorded. So go ahead and sign up, and they'll send you the Herbal Academy will send you the link to the recording if you've signed up. Thanks for joining me today. And next week, we'll be back talking more about food security and what you can do to help your family be safe regardless of what comes this fall. Bye-bye.